Mm. Everybody, welcome to the 52nd edition of Vision du Réel International Film Festival, to one of our talk dedicated to the shorts and medium length competition. I'm very glad to be here surrounded by filmmakers, even if on distance. I would like to welcome Adrian Paci. Hello, Adrian, director of Vedo, Rosso. Allison Chhorn. Hello, Allison, director of Blind Body. Jessie, Zinn, presenting Wavelengths. Pierre Schlesser, I hope I say it right, presenting Réel. Suyu Lee, presenting Trees in the Summer. Teboho Edkins with the Orphanage, and last but not least, Toby with a certain kind of intimacy. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for presenting your movie at the festival. I would like to remind our audience that the movie are available online for 72 hours. Our chat will be also available for all the duration of the festival if you want to see us again. As every year, the selection of short and medium length, it's a place in which we discover a lot of different films and languages, and for us, it's a very precious space in the festival. All of your films are very diverse, and this is always a good news to see that there are so many different forms of cinematic language that happens constantly. So I'm really happy that you are all participating together. What we noticed in all your film is that there is a common thread. There is a theme that keeps coming back in different form, but there is in a way underground in all the film, and this is the representation of a trauma, of a violence, and the perception and the communication of it in a very different way. It's maybe more direct in Adrian's film. It's maybe more distant in Toby's film. But I think that this idea of the constraint of the body and how to put these, how to communicate this through a film with the right distance and keeping into consideration the character, it's something very delicate and that you all achieved. I would like to know, I would like to ask each of you how this aspect was tackled for you during the filming and how this influenced the making of the film itself. And maybe we can start with Adrian.
Hello, thank you for inviting me and for this talk. Well, my film actually, it was a commission. So this is like the difference also compared with other works of mine. Often when I work on a project of film, it starts from an encounter with something, from an encounter with a story or with an image. In this case, it was this phone call. We were in the beginning of the lockdown in Milano, and Milano was very tough. I mean, the situation with the COVID. I received this phone call from Fondazione In Between Art Film, and they were proposing me to participate in this project called Mascarilla 19 for making a new video piece or new film around the topic of domestic violence. And can you imagine? I mean, you can imagine we were like at home. We had no tools, no possibility to collaborate with teams to produce something. And I said, well, I mean, I will see. I don't know. I mean, if I can be able or not, but I am not saying no, because we also were thinking about to decline a bit this also on the topic of how the tool is affected by this. Somehow this kind of violence was also entering into the language of the video or of the film. But somehow the topic of domestic violence and the violence against women, I mean, it's too strong to be somehow solved in this idea of, more, I mean, the violence against the tool, somehow it was, anyhow, I start playing with the only tool that I had with me, which was my mobile phone. And staying at home, I start like filming everything around and spending time, watching the screen of the mobile phone and trying to imagine what I can do. But always, like I do normally in my work, like trying to find something that could make, you know, that click happen in my mind to continue the process. So then suddenly filming a little object in the room, it was a sunny day in Milano, I saw this red color entering in the screen and I was, wow, what a beautiful red color. And actually it was nothing so spiritual, but it was just my finger entering in the camera and creating this beautiful bright red color. And I kept filming this and I didn't stop filming. And in the meantime, the finger was moving a little bit. So I had these seconds of this bright, vibrating red color. And then I start thinking that maybe this could be the starting point to build then something. So somehow it was this, everything started from this kind of frustration and from this kind of frustration of not being able to do anything and not having the tools to do anything. The other thing was, of course, what do I know about this topic? I mean, how can I talk about a topic that I don't have a kind of intimacy and I don't have a kind of deep connection with that? And then, of course, you know, how can you build, you know, how can you give images, you know, to such a problematic topic? So somehow this red color was for me a kind of starting point, because somehow the body was canceled, but also the body was there, because this finger was giving the sense of kind of closeness. It was so close that it canceled somehow the presence of the image of the body. So then it became the space for a story to be told and to construct around this color. And so I start collecting real stories. And then I had this dialogue with this wonderful writer and actress in Rome, Daria De Florian. And then after different talks and different, you know, phone calls and Skypes and everything, she came out with this text and that she read in a very natural way. But I mean, of course, the fact that she's an actress, you know, somehow brings it to another level. But everything was done in a way not to force the story, to create a kind of rhetoric again around it, you know. So yeah, so this is more or less the story of this work, you know, that came out, as I said, from this impossibility in the beginning, and that it opened up the space through this accident moment at home. And then it became the space for the story and for the voice. And then I decided to introduce only in 3 moments of the film, 3 close-ups of some other shootings that I had done in Beirut when I was filming some refugees. And then I thought that, you know, somehow this eye can appear and disappear quickly in between the story and interrupt this red color.
Thank you, Adrian. Jessie, it's in your film Wavelengths, it's in the story also. We don't see actually the protagonist, but the story and the construction and the communication of trauma, it's at the center. At the same time, you decided to show images coming also from a period of constraint. And how did you work? How did it happen in your case?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question with regards to my film, because in terms of representation, from the beginning, there was a sort of ethical dilemma on the level of visibility. and how to represent a narrative that is essentially based on confidentiality and mutual trust. And so when I first approached the hotline, they, from the beginning, explained and expressed that they have very explicit terms where they don't record any of the phone calls in real time and would never betray the trust, rightfully so, of the callers. And so it was an interesting kind of dynamic from the get-go. So in a way, it was, when I was approaching the hotline, I was trying to make visible something that at the time I felt was still being quite invisible, and it wasn't really being spoken about much, especially with how women's bodies in general were being affected by lockdown. But then also it's like the question of how to visibilize this invisible thing while at the same time respectfully, approaching the hotline and the terms in which they work. So essentially, I spoke to them and they expressed and explained that they do these roll call phone calls in order to train the hotline operators. And a lot of the hotline operators are people themselves who called in from the other side and have had experiences with abortion themselves. And so none of these calls were scripted. They were all very much based on real life experiences. But I essentially decided to frame the film around these roll call phone calls in order to represent these stories while at the same time remaining respectful to the real-time callers and their confidentiality policies. And so it was really interesting. And at the same time, after going through and combing through all of these role play calls that I filmed for the purpose of the shoot, I realized that there were certain elements that could never really truly be represented verbally through these role play calls. And that was the reason for approaching it in a more poetic form with the poem that links each call. And that poem is very much based on real-time extracts from the interviews that I did with, I was like around 25 women from the hotline. And it was very interesting. And then I was thinking about invisibility of narratives and, all of these kind of untold stories that were happening during the initial stages of lockdown or shelter in place, as it was referred to in the Bay Area. And so I started to try and think about ways in which I could film it that would like speak to this invisibility. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to film it all at night, because I think that darkness, it has a really interesting quality of concealing and also then being a sort of like protective cloak in which stories can also emerge. And so I decided to approach it through this visual metaphor of darkness. And so you see the operators listening to these calls and they're like emanated from the light within their own homes because they were all having to operate from their home environments throughout shelter in place. They were having to answer the calls from their domestic settings, in which of course the personal begins to blur with the work. And so in a way, it was like these portals of light being lit up all over the Bay Area during, a very dark time, like literally and metaphorically, for not just these women calling in, but for like a lot of people all over the world.
Thank you. Toby, we are, your film also, it's, let's say, based on a phone call. It's rather very, it's a certain kind of intimacy, I think is the best title ever possible for your film. I really loved it because, there is this undeniable sense of comedy in the film, though there is the intimacy of a loss and also a questioning about how what will be our memory of it is tackled. How did you literally came up with this?
Got a bit of a delay on my side, so just waiting for you to finish talking. There we go. Okay, great. I can. hear myself, so I'm going to talk into it like this, because otherwise I can hear myself talking. So yeah, I actually set out to make a film about death from the perspective of the sheep living in the graveyard. And it was only in the course of doing so that my brother got in the way of what I wanted to do and helped me make a very different kind of film. At first, I spent about 7 days at first filming in the graveyard. My brother called me by chance, so I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about representability. I mean, it's a peculiar kind of half-life that people that we love, when they die and they go, but they also kind of stay around. And I think I kind of went to the graveyard to film with the sheep, first of all, because I was trying to find some way to represent this kind of contradictory half-life that people have with us after they've died. The phone call arrived as a sort of accident, but sort of led me into making a very different kind of film. I think sorry, can you hear me all right? Okay, great. It's quite, it's kind of, maybe if I try here, sorry.
We hear you.
Okay, great, that's better. My microphone's being very strange. So could you just repeat the question? Sorry, I've just messed it a bit.
Okay, I was starting by the title of your film. That is the possible best ever title for your film specifically. And then I wanted to know how you came up with the film, that it was as Jessie's film based on the phone calls. So how did you came up with the representation of what is the memory of a loss, and as you were saying before, the half-life of people that passed away but are still.
So when we began with the edit, we had about a 40-minute cut, and it compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed. Over time, the phone calls, which felt like an incidental part of a film that was more primarily focused on a shepherd who lived in the graveyard and the sheep, slowly became more and more a film about my relationship with the place and my relationship with my brother. I think that the kind of center of the film, and I think the reason that the title works, is that the film tries to use the relationship between animals and humans to try and explore the relationship between the living and the dead. I've noticed sometimes that when I talk about the film, I kind of forget that there's this other kind of centerpiece to the film, which is my relationship with my brother. And I think maybe one of the things that is quite funny about the film is precisely that these two kind of more abstract or conceptual relationships, that between animals and human beings and the living and the dead, to me maybe seem more straightforward than the relationship between me and my brother. Because in a way, the kind of conflict that's at the heart of the film, my brother's difference of perspective with me, my attempt to get him to sort of help me understand what I'm doing, is kind of the thing that helped us work out what the film was and what kind of film we were making. There's something kind of interesting in the way that the film developed, in that the conversation undertaken between my brother and I kind of came from a handful of conversations that we had over the phone that we slowly compressed into one film, or one kind of conversation that kind of is bolted together over the course of the 5 or 6 minute film. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about the question that you asked me about trauma, that my film kind of sits on the furthest out end, maybe compared to Adrian's, in the way in which it handles trauma and the body. But I suppose watching Adrian's film, which I loved, I really enjoyed very much, the body as a space felt like a very kind of foreign and alien domain in his film, in relation to the words of the person talking. And I suppose in mine, something similar is operating, in the way that the body can hold memories sometimes that are quite far away from our kind of lived or conscious experience. In my film, I feel as though it's the animals that are holding some of that that I'm kind of projecting some of what I haven't yet quite worked out in words onto the behavior of the animals in ways that I guess sometimes similar to how people project memories or ideas onto their own bodies.
Yeah, I think that there is these images that as like occupying the middle of the film of this big sheep attacking a tree and doing it over and over and over. And I thought that this was really interesting to see in relationship with the conversation with your brother, like on the differences of point of view and on also the capacity or incapacity to change on this idea on those topics.
Sure, and I think it's surprising to me, and I found it quite moving the way that a disagreement between my brother and I that was at the time quite difficult, in the end became a vehicle for clarifying and declaring and putting forth the kind of meaning at the heart of the film. That's perhaps another kind of intimacy that's kind of explored in the movie. The way that kind of disagreeable or disagreements or conflicts between people can often be vehicles for clarification, meaning intimacy, kind of intimacy very close to the heart of especially family relationships. So we find ourselves arguing about the things that are most important to us and often using kind of conflicting positions to help clarify our own. You know, I mean, the conversation that we have on the phone was one where like we didn't speak for a little bit afterwards. It was quite a hard conversation, and it was only really after time and reflection and further conversation that I began to see the way in which, through disagreeing with me, my brother had kind of enabled me to make sense of what it was I was doing. So I guess to add to that, it's maybe one of the things happening with the sheep and also with the site, that is precisely by disagreement as well as agreement between the kind of what you hear and what you see, between my beliefs about the sheep and their own behavior, that the kind of meaning, kind of ambivalent or contradictory meaning at the center of the film begins to articulate itself in that respect between representation and non-representation.
Thank you very much, Toby. Pierre, I would like you to talk a little bit about L'Huile and the Fer.
Yes.
Because it's, in a way, what you're representing, it's a sort of, it's a sort of trauma, but it's on your perception, and on the other way, it's really the development or like, in a way, the consuming of a body that happened during the years, little by little, and how this, after all, was like not even considered probably as a traumatic or a violence toward the body of your family. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit how you decided to approach this?
Yes, so the beginning of the movie is about my father accident. He died in a work accident, and then I saw, I understood many things at this moment. I remember all those bodies. I grew up with around me many bodies which are violented every day by work, and I really I wanted to make something about this. I wanted to make a kind of with the cinema, maybe a kind of justice to represent them in another. Not in a. I wanted to find them again, to see them again, to discover again the world of my childhood, and to celebrate them, to understand. So I wanted to as you said, it's a kind of a trauma, because this violence made to some people that works very hard all their life, and who are in every day in a kind of danger. Me, I work mostly as an editor, so I'm not risking my life every day behind a computer. It's not dangerous, but most of the people of my family, of the generation before me, they were doing hard work, dangerous work with some disease or some accident. So I wanted to there is I was just thinking to something when there was a few years ago, my grandmother, not the one which was in the movie, but the other one, she came to visit me in Geneva, and I showed her the cathedral, and the only thing she said was not, "Oh, it's beautiful," or she was not impressed by the cathedral, but she directly told me, each stone is the back of someone. It's everything was made by people with their hand. This is suffering, The cathedral is not. Is before being a holy place. It's a place of suffering, so of body violented. So this is. I think this is the topic of the movie, trying to find, trying to show, to represent this and to celebrate those bodies violented every day.
Thank you. Allison, first of all, thank you for being with us at night, because I know that it's a little bit late for you. Well, it's the second year in a row you are in Vision du Réel. This time you are, I think that the topic of difficulty of representation of a suffering, it's very central. And in a way, it's maybe linked to what we were saying before with Adrian. But I think that it's at the same time very intimate and empathic toward the character. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. Thank you for having me again. And I think with my film, it kind of started with the lack of information and the lack of sight in my grandma's case, who was partially blind. And so I wanted to make a film about her and imagine how she sees the world with her failing eyesight. And so I originally just documented her living her daily life and just observing her moving around her room and the house. And as I started editing, I realized the footage became more abstract, and it was kind of moving away from how the body is usually represented with, people with normal eyesight, and kind of imagining how the body and the soul is connected when you lose your vision. I feel like you're more reliant on memory. And so I think I tried to work the film towards that, and specifically about the trauma that we were talking about in my grandma's case. So she survived the Khmer Rouge genocide in 1975 to 1979. And that is a fact, I know, but I don't know the personal story of it. And I think I tried to find out more about it through making this film, but I only really got a small portion of it. And I realized it was also the memory she had is stored in her body, has been stored in her body for a long time. And it was for me just a way to imagine that instead of trying to document that in a realistic way. I had to kind of imagine that for myself.
And how it was for you during the shooting? This is something that came up like while you were already processing the film, or?
No, I did an interview with her only like halfway through editing, so it kind of prompted me to ask more questions.
Thank you. I would like to ask Teboho to talk us a little bit about the orphanage, because about like everyday violence in a way, or what Pierre was saying in your film, it's less but also more frontal, and so I would like, and also like much wider of the wall of the institution you're visiting. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So in fact, the film, I was looking for violence. I was researching a longer film that I made called Days of Cannibalism. And I was looking for moments of violence and moments of trauma, and looking for my film. And I stumbled across this orphanage quite by accident. And I spent a few days there, and I filmed it. And what you see is what we filmed. But the film, so it was part of my research for my longer film, and I just put it aside. And then I was sort of thinking about the material I had, and I found out that one of my great aunt was a missionary in China who wanted to build an orphanage for Chinese children. And I sort of took that information and I relooked at the footage I had and created the film you see. And the film is meant to maybe function more in the art context. I mean, it's built so that you can watch it as a loop. You know, it's meant to kind of be quite flat as a film. It's meant to just, you know, go on and on and on and on. So at endless day. I mean, it's really simple. You know, it's very minimal. It's what I experienced with these children in that moment, and it was a kind of a in-between space between the sort of sublime kind of holiness or some sort of spirituality that is created, and then the kind of underlying darkness and violence and sadness that one finds. And I just tried to show that in this simple short film I made.
I think that the very traumatic experience of your film that I found personally very traumatic, it's that we see an entire generation, or we see kids or small children that are robbed of their identity on a daily basis. It's like they were literally shipped in another place, in another context, far away from they were born. And I think this has been, and of course then the second thought is about the new colonization of that China is trying to undertake in the African continent. But this, I think that this like deprivation of identity was to me the most
Yeah, I mean, I tried not to think too much about the film, actually. I tried not to analyze it. I didn't want to overthink it, you know. I wanted to make something that was just simple and flat. But I mean, it's all there. Well, one can also think of it. The children there, they're there by they're not forced to be there. I mean, they're forced to be there because they have no other option, because there's no food at home, or their parents have no longer parents, so they're shipped to this orphanage. But I mean, they're not recruited as such. They're given there, but I mean, they're given as children, so they have no agency. So that's quite violent. I think what really affected me was just spending time in this place. I started feeling a bit like the children. One sort of becomes lulled by this sort of constant singing. They have these. I think they have three prayer sessions a day, and then the meditation sessions, and it's just constant sort of singing and kind of tranquilizing force that is kind of the sort of hub that is created of the place that is really, really difficult. But what I tried to do it without judgment. I mean, I think that if I showed the film to the people that are running the place, they would not think it's bad. They wouldn't think that I'm passing judgment on the space, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create quite a neutral film, or a neutral glance, a neutral regard. So what one feels when one watches it is a little bit, I try to leave that open. Yeah. I had a bit of a question whether I was going to subtitle because there are the moments when they're being spoken, or when they're taught Mandarin, and I was wondering whether I should subtitle that or not. And I decided not to kind of create this sort of distancing, this Entfremdung, the kind of feeling that I had as of being there.
Thank you. Suyu. Hi. Trees in the Summer, it's a film that it's a real journey. And I think not only because of the landscape you're showing, but also through your memory and through also an experience of something very intimate, that as the illnesses can be. How were you articulating this in the film?
You mean that how I planned to make the film? Or
how you were interweaving the different elements present in the film together?
First, for some years, I have been thinking of making a film about my childhood memories. And I wanted to link my mom's memories to my childhood memories. And the diagnosis of the cancer was another momentum of the filmmaking. And so for the surgery and the therapy, I had to stay inside both physically and mentally. So I had to concentrate more on my memories and my bodily feelings at the same time. So I think I interweave like three different stories in this film. The first is the childhood memories. The second is the illness narrative with the medical graphics. And the third one is about the landscape, the natural sceneries. So in the film, I tried to link my personal feelings to the medical graphics and the landscapes. That's what I wanted to do.
Thank you. So I imagine some of you have seen the film of each other. So if you have any questions, or if you want to like do as in festival we do, the directors talks to each other. Otherwise, I would like to, so you were saying that you wanted to like work on the landscape in relationship also to your feeling, your and how did you choose what were those elements of the landscape that were like more communicating with your personal feelings?
The sceneries are usually from the closest areas where I live, and with the footages, I didn't plan to use it in the film. I just bought a small camera to make some photos and videos, just to record the images of trees and suns and winds. And I just collected those images, and I didn't want to put it in a very in a strict order, and I wanted to make the very not direct link between the narrative and image. So I tried to keep a kind of distance between the storylines and the images. Yes.
Thank you. Adrian, I was thinking about what you were saying, because I am familiar with the project you have been commissioned with, Mascarilla. And at the same time, when I heard first of the project, and then when I see the films of it, I was wondering how should have been in a moment such as the lockdown in Milano, as you were saying, to be very strict in a way, to be that was already a very like psychologically heavy moment for everybody, to be commissioned with this another like very strong and yet again very heavy topic, and at the same time so important that were like coming up, that people were start to talk more. And the text of your film, I think that the strength of the text of the film, it's that it's in a way ordinary. So there is and the way in which we arrive to the, I call it climax, but it's not a climax, in which we truly discover what it was going on, it arrived quite late. So how was for you to work, like to read this text, to work with it, and to like process it in this peculiar moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because as I said, the first thing I did, after I decided to work on the red, with the story and the text and the voice on the red, was to collect real stories. And I have a friend of mine who she works with these women, and she sent me some reports. But of course, in all these reports, it was more like the poor families, the husband who lost the job, and then he started drinking, and then he comes home and beat the wife, so, or the kids. And somehow I didn't want to use this kind of cliche for the film, so we wanted to build a story that can be somehow for everybody and for every kind of society, like, it could be in Italy, it could be in Albania, it could be in Switzerland, So this was the dialogue that we were developing with Daria was about this. How can we remain simple? How can we remain delicate, but at the same time without hiding the dramaticity of the fact, into kind of, I didn't want to make kind of intellectualistic film, so where you hide because you don't want to show it directly, but then it becomes like with all these filters that, your mind is building. And so I wanted to keep this immediacy, this kind of directness, this kind of simplicity, but not to make it just too heavy, and to give only one direction, to make it like tragic as the fact, it could be. The domestic violence has something tragic in itself, but somehow to keep it in the simplicity of the everyday, something that happens also through the details of the everyday living, with somebody, in a relationship. So, in that sense, I'm really grateful to Daria for, how she was able to write and then to interpret, because also the way of writing, but also the way of interpreting, brought to that level of simplicity, spontaneity, but at the same time without hiding the dramaticity of the topic.
Thank you. Pierre, there is a part of your film in which you talk about rage and hate for what you have been witnessing your life. And I think that this is like the point in which it's more visible, your reaction, and also you put in more in relationship yourself with what you were saying. How do you think that this aspect was like influencing you as a filmmaker, as an editor or as a filmmaker?
Can you just repeat, please, because I'm not sure I understood well the question.
I said that there is a moment in which you talk about being in rage with your family about this notion of exploitation, that it seems that you cannot communicate, or there is a moment in which you say that you feel guilty of not working as a slave. So I think that this is very strong, and I would like you to say how this influenced your way of making movie.
So this is two different moments. The rage I'm speaking about, it's this feeling, this kind of I felt kind of a prisoner in a very small world. I felt kind of condemned to a life that I didn't want it to live. So a rude life, a difficult life, physical and with not any, with no many kind of pleasure. And so this made me angry in a way. But this anger became very different when I realized that I became after this. I had a kind of rage for those people. I think that I feel an injustice. So this rage changed a lot when I tried when I discover I realized that there was a kind of injustice against them. So this decided me to make movies. So I understood that I had kind of a debt. I don't know what is English for this, but
tu peux le dire,
une dette.
Comment on dit une dette en anglais? Debt.
Debt. Okay, excuse me. So I had a debt with them. So and when I realized this, I realized that it had to be the subject of my movies for now. So so this is I did this kind of move, trying to be at first to feel a rage against this world and to feel ashamed, but then I feel ashamed of having being ashamed, you know. So and when at this time I understood this needed to be this would be the subject of this movie particularly. Yes, one of the subjects. So this is yeah. I don't know if this answer to your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to talk a little bit with Jessie more about this, and because on the other side, when Pierre, it's like talking about rage in your film, on the contrary, there is a lot of resilience in a way, even though that there is a sort of, when he's mentioned shame, I think that, and for me, it was very striking to see the voluntary making like a aquarelle, and like something like soothing in a way the distress of this moment. Did you have this feeling while you were shooting?
I'm sorry, could you just clarify the last part of your question?
Sorry, I had someone waiting me somewhere.
No.
If this, because this is I was saying that there is a lot of resilience and like a sort of calm and sense of acceptances that's in the film. If you had this sensation while you were shooting, or if you were like working towards communicating this feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think post-abortion experiences, there's a wide range of them. For this particular film, the role play calls that I ended up recording had the sentiment, I think a lot was running through all of them. It was a bit of a trend in terms of the resilience and the calmness, but also I think often when it comes to questions of the topic of abortion, especially within the context of the United States, where it's still very controversial, often it's cast in a very black and white, good versus bad kind of light. And with this film, I really wanted to stay away from that, and I wanted to show a more nuanced depiction of these experiences that maybe are less, I guess, extreme in a way, because I do feel like after speaking to a lot of the hotline operators, there was a sense that, you know, the majority of the people who called in, it's not some big emotional trauma necessarily. Often it's more just a sense of needing to talk through how they're feeling in their day. And that's also one of the reasons why a lot of the calls take place at night, because it's often when they finished work, when they're sitting at home. Nighttime is often when loneliness and isolation sets in. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah.
But
no, I'm sure that is also must be difficult, because I know, as you said, the range of feeling can change to person, but I personally had this in a way that the film also was like to pay homage to the people that are doing this job and are trying to make this more like I don't know how to say in English. My English is getting poorer by the minutes, but I mean, acceptable for yourself.
That's why it's called Wavelengths, is because it's the film is about the act of listening at its core, and it's very much an homage to the women who listen, especially because they themselves have gone through those experiences that they're listening to. And so there's an incredible amount of resilience from the operator side that I really wanted to feature in the film and honor. And yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have a communication coming. So I think we have still 4 minutes to talk, more or less. And I would like to maybe ask Teboho. Teboho, you're shooting often in Lesotho. That is the place in which you were born and raised. And in a way, for me, what you were saying, that you were, and I know that you are working with youth for long times, because this is another, it's like your previous film were also like working with the younger generation. You were saying that you were not trying to give a judgment, that this was like a part of a research for a bigger film, and that you wanted to make it in loop. So why for you is important, first of all, the idea of loop, of the idea of repetition, and how difficult or at the same time easy is to go there without a judgment and like to keep it neutral?
I made some films with gangsters before, and I think that's where I learned how to not judge, maybe. What I'm really interested in, because with this work, is that it's more. I made it more for an art space. So I created an installation with 4 films that work in an art space and show it alternate walls and kind of come in at different times and sort of continue all day. So I'm trying to understand how to create a documentary narrative in a 3D space. You know, like how does one tell a story, a documentary story or a documentary conflict or a documentary situation in a gallery or museum space with installation? And that's the sort of language that I'm trying to find with this film, The Orphanage. And 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 part of that is that you can walk into the film and walk out of the film at any time, and it still makes sense somehow. You know that the narrative, the narrative is not like this, but maybe more like that. You know, and the way that it works as a loop has to do with the sound, of course, and this sort of endless singing and this endless meditation, and yeah, just sort of how it went. But I'm really because I made this feature-length film, which because it's a feature-length film has to have some sort of narrative arc. I'm working on recreating the same concept that I looked for in the feature-length film, but in an art space, and that's why the Orphanage has become what it is. You know, that's why it has taken this form. So I don't know if that made sense.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Yes. I have one curiosity, maybe last one. Toby, you were saying that you wanted to make a movie first before this one about sheep in graveyards. Is as I understood correctly?
About sheep in graveyards.
Yeah.
No, it was actually the funny thing at the beginning of this film is that I traveled to the graveyard with my brother many times, but mostly for him. And I had never really wanted to go by myself to visit my parents. The time that I went with him, the time before I shot the film, I noticed the sheep in the corner of the field and thought it would be interesting to make a film about death from the perspective of a sheep, death, human death and human mourning, but also death for sheep, being slaughtered, being reared. I then traveled back to go and make that film about the life cycle of a sheep living in a graveyard where human beings go to mourn. And it was only in the course of beginning to shoot that film that my brother called me and helped me realize that it was in fact the first time I had ever traveled to the graveyard where my parents were buried by myself. So in a way, that kind of film that I set out to make, which didn't feature my perspective at all about these sheep living there, in the end, having made this film, it feels a lot more like that was an excuse to go and visit my parents for the first time. And for me, the excuse was making a film.
There is one scene in which there is we can see a leg of a sheep exactly on a gravestone. And it's really beautiful. It doesn't have nothing of, in a way, it seems the most natural thing in the world. And it's something that it will never be possible in the kind of graveyards I am used to, but to see it, it looks like the best possible idea.
There's something very, people have different relationships to the sheep being there. It's like a natural burial ground. So everyone's buried in coffins that become compost for trees that are planted there and for the grass that the sheep eat. So there's a kind of ecological there's an ecosystem there between sort of death and decay and kind of germ and birth. And it's very evocative. So certainly, I think that's one of the things that I was drawn to explore the way in which the bodies that get buried there have concrete, kind of organic afterlives in the bellies of the sheep that live there. But then I suppose too, these kind of more spiritual or poetic or philosophical things about the kind of ethereal afterlives the people that we love have inside us.
Thank you. Well, I think we finished our time. And yeah, this is the festival timing, I'm sorry, but I would like to thank everybody for being with us today. I would like to say once again to our audience that they have the film available online. And well, I can only wish I meet you all in Réel very soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.